Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is SIC Talks number 72. I am joined by, in her second appearance, Casey Lewis. Casey is a friend from the internet who has become a friend in real life. I first encountered her through the Why Is This Interesting Monday Media Diet, I think, a couple of years back now, and gave Casey a shout and said, hey, would you come on SIC Talk? And then as a function of that, got into after school, and it's now like maybe my most essential source of news, at least for certain, portions of my life. So big fan and paying subscriber, and would encourage all of you to do that. But Casey's got a bunch of new news. So anyway, hi, Casey.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your newsletter, so it is an honor to be here.
Well, you did me a great service by agreeing to this on very short notice, which I am very grateful for. And also, it's indicative of my general state of mind, right? Where I thought I had somebody booked and it turned out to be next week. And it was a whole thing. So anyway, you saved me. Thank you. Not to make too big a deal of it, but you've been in the news a bunch lately for a variety of different reasons. One, you wrote a big story in New York Magazine about shopping with tweens. Secondly, you've been suddenly become a television personality by virtue of your new I guess maybe like the TikTok is what kicked it off, but you're on what, CNBC last week or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And then last week you announced that you were leaving your job to do after school full time, which is, I mean, like tremendously exciting and for me super edifying, but also like it's a huge step. So congratulations. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
There are a few things to talk about. Talk about a few things.
Thank you so much, Ben. The live TV thing is not something that I expected to happen for me, and also it's like frankly kind of terrifying because you realize like as they're like counting down, you're like I could say something that could get me canceled or like be the like talk of the internet in this moment.
Yeah. And did you succeed?
I haven't yet, but it's gonna have me. I'll be back on Friday. It's like a monthly thing now.
Oh wow! I didn't realize that. I thought maybe this was like subject matter expertise, but this is.
Yeah. So I have ample opportunity to get myself canceled.
Well, I mean, listen. You know who got started in exactly this fashion was Scott Galloway. So I'm looking forward to your, new tete-a-tete with Kara Fisher or whoever the Kara Fisher of the future is. I feel like you and Emily Sundberg as the new Scott and Kara type thing.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I know. Look, I just think it's tremendously exciting, and I also I think we're approaching an interesting point of inflection where independent journalists, if you will accept that designation for the moment, start to exemplify the future state of media. And as I was telling you off camera, like I just came from a lunch that Kyle Chayka was the what's it called, featured speaker at, or the guest of honor or whatever. And in thinking about Kyle's work, both in founding Dirt, which he's no longer involved with, but also with starting One Thing, it really feels like there's a confluence of the newsletter impulse and mainstream journalism that I think is relatively new. And I to see somebody like you embody it is exciting for me because you know your shit. So I don't know. There's no question there. That's just me going on.
I mean, I will say the sort of state of media is so bleak that to see newsletters, to see even like people like Kyle, who is almost a product of mainstream media, I guess, in a way, but to see him do all of these extremely interesting things. And he's obviously an incredibly talented person, but like people like him give me hope that the state and future of media is not as bleak as, we see with Vice and Complex and all of these terrible headlines this last year alone, but also the last 5 years alone, but also the last 10 years alone. Like there's just been so much bad media news, but to see people like him and all these substackers that we're seeing thrive, like Business of Fashion today just wrote about the beauty substackers. Last week, Vogue Business wrote about all of the shopping substackers. Like so cool to see these independent creators make more money than they ever could dream of making if they were employed by Conde Nast.
Right. Well, that, and then also just to be able to determine their own course and assert their own personalities in a way that doesn't get subsumed by the larger organization or whatever the case is. What I also like about it is that people are able to pick a lane and go deep within it as you do with Gen Z, but also to deviate a little bit from it, right? Like you don't, if I was on the City Hall beat at a local newspaper, I would be allowed to write about City Hall. I would not be able to write about my interesting breakfast in my City Hall space. Whereas all of these independents have the opportunity to be like, yeah, I don't feel like talking about Gen Z today. I want to talk about eggs. And then maybe you bring Gen Z back to eggs at some point later. When will Gen Z discover eggs, by the way?
It's a good question. I think they've discovered dairy milk, so eggs can't be too far behind.
Oh my God. Casey, like every time I'm once or twice a year, I try to send you something related to young people, and it might be an observation from one of my kids, or it might be a story that I found or whatever. And invariably you've seen it and have a better take on it. But is there anything over the last, like, I don't know, let's say the week or so, or even maybe a story that might be referred to in the newsletter that jumps out at you as being particularly interesting, indicative, salient, stupid?
Oh man. I mean, so this story about young people and hallucinogens, I think that's fascinating, right? Like, young people, we're seeing all these headlines that young people are drinking less, they're not going out, they're just generally they're not having sex at the same, like, just all of these things that make them seem so seemingly straight laced, but then to have dazed out here reporting from the ground of that they're actually doing mushrooms and ketamine and a couple of drugs that I never even heard of, which made me feel like such a out of touch millennial.
Wait. So sorry. So you're not like a T2CB devotee?
Yeah. What? T2CB. What's funny is DMT I was not familiar with until the Gen Z cusper who works at my local wine store brought up DMT. So
interesting.
Which is interesting in and of itself, right? Like the wine guy bringing up DMT. But there's just like some really interesting things happening, I think, with young people and substances and, choosing to maybe go out to dinner and pop magic mushroom chocolates instead of drinking wine. Like there's just some really interesting things happening.
Yeah. It's really, it's funny to riff on this a little bit. Like, one of the themes of this lunch that I was just at was because apropos of Kyle's book Filter World, which is out and is about how the algorithms from the big platforms flatten culture, or just digital algorithms generally, recommendation engines flatten culture. One of the lines of discussion had to do with the idea of kids having everything served to them in a endless scroll style fashion where you never have to go and get anything. You never have to discover anything. The machine will do it for you if you want it to. And I wonder to what extent the hallucinogen in particular, because it's such an inward experience or a dissociative experience.
Yeah.
It's about the desire for discovery, right? In a way that they've never experienced because everything is given to them that way. I wonder if that's partially it.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought, especially I've been thinking, like you include in the newsletter, the young people being over email jobs. Like there's just like an interesting tension but at the same time, more young people than ever are not working or going to school.
Right.
More people are living at home with their parents, men especially. So maybe like that does make sense why they want to sort of like drop out on a little ketamine, and maybe like what will come of that is they will be inspired to go out and leave the coddled like sort of surroundings of their parents' couch.
Yeah, well, which is interesting because it ties into two things that I wanted to mention. One is that as far as DMT goes, I have a buddy, suburban dad in Maplewood, who recently told me about two things that he likes to do out there in Maplewood. One of them is vape DMT.
Oh,
And the other one is go to the Elks Lodge. Apparently, because there's nothing like cool or interesting, and this is a very cool and interesting friend of mine. There's nothing cool or interesting out there. So these guys, he and a bunch of other dads, have essentially made their own scene by joining the Elks Lodge, which apparently costs $80, and the only like vow you have to take is that you won't overthrow the American government. And so, yeah, exactly. And then and then they go and they get $3 beers and like Grateful Dead cover bands play, and it's all very funny.
That's cool as hell.
Yeah, I mean, so consequently, I don't know that it's just the Z's that are experimenting this way, but it also, the other thing that it ties into, and I really wanted to get your take on it because I think you sit at such an interesting, I don't know what avenue I'm trying to avoid saying the word intersection because I think it's totally overused, but you sit at such an interesting location in this discourse. Is all of the conversation around Jonathan Haidt's, new book, and the notion that we are essentially ruining kids' brains by virtue of social platforms and so on and so forth. My feeling on the topic, having teenagers, is that we aren't giving that argument, while sound in some respects, doesn't give credit to the idea that these kids are durable and resilient and creative in their own way, and just experiencing this in a fashion that's different to their parents. And at the same time, their parents are feeling the anxiety of their own experience and are projecting it back into this like fever dream. I wonder, as somebody who thinks a lot about this generation of people, but doesn't have, young kids or teenagers, like where you land on that spectrum.
Oh man, I think if I were a parent, I would have more emotional feelings about this. Mm-hmm. My point of view is I grew up on the internet. I grew up on forums, chat, AIM chat. It was a very different time on the internet, but it also very much shaped me. And I think it is a little trite to claim that the internet was your lifeline, but I do feel like that was very much the case because I'm from rural Missouri, and I had all these interests. Like I was interested in trends and super interested in style, and I had teen magazines, but that was like once a month. Right. And so the internet allowed me to learn about so many things that I would have like genuinely never been exposed to. Went to, from rural Missouri, went to University of Missouri for college. Like I would have genuinely not been exposed to so much. Like without the internet, like it's very possible I wouldn't live in New York. Not to say living in New York is the end all be all, but like my life, I think without the internet would be very different. So I think to sort of point to these smartphones and say, these are ruining young people's brains, these are ruining young people's lives, like it's super reductive. And I also think, there's for sure bad.
Yeah, of course.
And it also makes me like think about when I was growing up, my brother and I loved MTV. We also loved, there was a hip hop MTV. I can't remember.
There's BT, of course, but then you're probably talking about the video jukebox.
Oh, you know what? I'm thinking of, it was called Direct Effect. And it was,
I don't know that one. Okay.
Either on MTV or, I think it was on MTV. It was like in the mornings. And my brother and I would watch it while getting ready for school. And it would be like DMX video. Like it was a lot of Busta Rhymes. And I remember my parents being like these music videos are rotting your brain. Like such a like cliched parent thing.
Yeah.
And they weren't rotting our brains, though.
No.
They were exposing my brother and I to a culture that we frankly did not have any insight to. And I love rap music to this day. Like, it exposed me to a lot in a really good way. Was I also exposed to some darker sides of the internet at that point? Yeah, we all did in our, like, AIM chats.
Sure.
But I do think, like, and of course, young people these days, Snapchat, TikTok, all of these other apps are exposing them to good and bad. Like the whole Snap Map thing, the pressures, like that sounds terrible for a kid. But I also think a lot of these apps and they're imparting experiences that young people might otherwise experience in a different way. Like clicks, being excluded, like all of these emotions they're difficult feelings, but we used to exclude the girl from the lunch table. That was a really shitty thing to do,
Yeah,
but it's
of course.
that different. I'm actually curious about what you see with your own kids with like these sort of like snap and like, do you see that? Does that impact them like emotionally?
Uh, I mean, it must, but but not in a way that I feel like is outsized or dangerous or creating unsafe pathologies or anything to that
Yeah.
effect. And look, touch wood, right? Because I am not monitoring their phones. I don't see everything they see and so on and so forth. But this is part of my sort of take on the whole issue is that my daughter is on Snap and has the Snap Maps thing enabled in the same way as all her friends does. That's what her friend group does. My son doesn't even have Snap, doesn't care about it, like only wants to participate in Instagram, and he's 17, so he should theoretically be a part of that whole universe just as much as my daughter is. My son, like I think it took him kind of a long time to get to the place where he felt like he could add to those discussions, and so he mostly just kind of stayed out of them. And now he feels like he can add, and he's active and very curious. And so I guess like the long story short is, yes, I'm sure it affects them emotionally, but not in a way that I think is dangerous. And to your point, is about experience. And so again, it worries me that there's all of this hand wringing, and particularly among millennial parents with young kids, of like, oh my God, everything has to change. Like the devices have to go, which it doesn't strike me as pragmatic. And it also, the thing I like about Jonathan Haidt, and we've been watching him, I've made the kids listen to him on Prof G, and I made Campbell watch him on HBO, and Bill Maher, was that he is making a measured argument.
Yeah.
It's just everybody takes that argument, metastasizes it, and turns it into this panic, which is what we do, right, with digital stories generally.
Yeah, I think it makes being a parent probably very stressful and complicated. I just learned last week about, again, I'm not a parent, so I'm not exposed to a lot of these things, but learned about gentle parenting and how that's sort of like dividing young parents. I don't know if this is something, maybe because your kids are older, but someone with young kids was telling me about gentle parenting, and who, like, you cannot say no in the house. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's totally insane. I mean, look, I am a believer that you should give kids a long lead, and you should let them experience stuff, and they're gonna fall down and hurt themselves sometimes, and that's part of growing up and learning. So I guess maybe on the gentle to autocratic side, I'm maybe more gentle,
Yeah.
but like. That what you just said reminds me of somebody compiles Reddit posts and puts them on Instagram from time to time. Former colleague of mine, and there was one where it was like, I am moving to Florida because I never want to wear shoes again. I'm okay taking a job that doesn't pay me very much because I found a place to live for $200, and just so long as I never have to wear shoes again. And it's that sort of argument. It's just like, what?
Yeah.
Is
know the enemy really? Are shoes really the enemy here?
Yeah. I mean,
and
shoes might be the enemy.
Shoes very well might be. Yeah. But no,
I don't know if you know this, but we live for millions of years without shoes. Anyway.
Yeah, something else with this, the social media, the smartphone, the like thinking about kind of bringing it to the like tween skincare, all of those like fear-mongering headlines of, is this really something we want to be stressed about? Like young people, young women in particular, have always experimented with makeup.
Yeah.
Now they have more access. There's Sephora's everywhere. There's Sephora's in Kohl's department stores. Like young people have access to all these different brands. A lot of these brands are packaged in very appealing, drunk elephant, like looks like a lot of fun. But I think I did that story for New York Magazine, and I talked to like 20 tweens, and it was really, really enlightening to talk to them because they all explored skincare in a like fun way. They were almost like you would like play with finger paints.
Right.
Finger paints.
That's sort of interesting that sorry to interrupt you, but the idea that like cosmetics are the new slime, or alternately like that cosmetics is where slime leads you to, right? It's that super tactile, almost ASMR-y, like, personal experience. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's like, if you're a little bit too old to play dolls with your friends, and you do grow out of that, and I think today's kids and tweens still play with dolls, this just the same, but then you start to maybe experiment with makeup with your friends. And I think the interesting thing about skincare is, as a parent, you maybe don't want your kid to go out with red lipstick on or with a full face of makeup on, but you kind of feel okay about your kid like slapping on some serum. Serum is expensive, but it can be, but for the most part,
right.
It's funny because I I have my like road. This is the Hailey Bieber stuff right here. It's like that was just as I was talking to you.
Shout out Hailey.
You're like, looking at me. But I think the thing is like, unless you're using like an anti-aging serum, which young people are not using that. Like they don't. It's fine. Like they're not going to hurt their skin. And I think back to my tween teen years reading 17 magazine. It those magazines sort of taught you to be obsessed with your skin back then. I had my Clear Assault, I had my Clean and Clear, I had all of this stuff. It's like really not that different now, except young people are learning about these things from TikTok and the internet versus teen magazines, RIP, because they don't really exist anymore in print form.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? We talked at the beginning about Kyle Chika and the success that you've had with After School, kind of creating a new media vehicle. Where do you see anybody creating new media vehicles for those kids outside of, TikTok videos or whatever the case is? Like I can think of a few examples. I mean, our friends at Byline being one. Yes. That's not obviously for young. It's not for young Z's, maybe older Z's, right? But I think those guys do a good job. I am struck by like Lucian Smith's For the People, which is a collection of young artists coming together to learn and sort of benefit from one another that makes physical experiences and does publications, kind of stuff. But I just wonder what you're seeing, because particularly like on the beauty side of things, like I'm so far out of my depth. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's really hard to think about plays that any sort of media play that isn't existing on short form video. I think Byline is a great example. And in fact, was just talking to a friend about Byline and how what they're able to do is fast. Like they're in year 2, or maybe they just hit.
Not even a year yet.
Showing up at South by, like, that is fascinating. And I think part of the reason that they're having the success that they are is because they are young and they didn't grow up. I know that Megan works at Vogue or maybe freelances, but they didn't grow up in these sort of like antiquated Conde Nast orbit. So they don't have these antiquated ideas of how a publication can interact with brands, can show like, I feel the Conde playbook or Cursed or whatever, it's like they're so formulaic and they're so old school. This is how we can work with brands. If you want to advertise online, you have to buy a print ad, or if you want to have a dinner, you have to, it's just, whereas someone or, the Byline girls, it's like they're burning it all down and rethinking, because this is a different time in media.
Well, sorry, go ahead. No,
well,
please.
I'm very, very hopeful that more publications like Byline will exist. I love print, and I think there's something really interesting about print in this. Another thing that I have in front of me, not for the purposes of this conversation, but I like have all these teen magazines around me always. And I think what's interesting about them is they have quizzes. They have so much like experiential stuff in here that I think would be really interesting if in 2024, the way that you could like interact with TikTok, like, what did you get on the quiz of what kind of boyfriend material are you? That kind of stuff. Like, there's something really interesting about because the thing I think that people forget about old school magazines, or maybe not, but like, there's a lot of like interactive stuff. There's a lot of like, in addition to quizzes, there's interesting charts. They did so much fun stuff back in the
Yeah.
day. And so I think that stuff could play very well on social media, and I'm hopeful that it will in some capacity.
Yeah, that's kind of fascinating. I mean, and what it brings to mind for me is sort of in live brainstorm mode is two things. One, I could imagine a version of after school behind the second paywall where you're quizzing people on developments of the week, and that's their way of I don't know what, like competing with their competing with their peers, or getting an after school certification, good housekeeping seal of like, I know what's up with the thing. As a matter of fact, it's funny, a friend of mine, a woman that used to work at she worked at Pepsi and then worked at Verizon. She used to give colleagues a cultural literacy test of her own devising, or I think it was of her own devising, her and maybe some other people. But it was essentially a like, do you know what we are talking about? Can we have any confidence at all that you're going to know what we're talking about? Let us ask you 10 questions. And the first, wow. I will never forget this. The first one was circa the Drake and Future record, and it was fill in the blank. What a time to be blank. Right now, you know the answer. I know the answer. Many of their colleagues apparently did not, which I found, gobsmacking. But in any case, I could imagine you doing that and actually offering it as a service to, like, a B2B service to enterprise. We'll work on the packaging off the mic.
Yeah.
But the other thing that occurs to me is that for a Byline or somebody else like that, I mean, Daisy at Dirt does a great job, and there are others. You could turn that into a miniature version of the New York Times gaming direction and make it not only a thing that attracts attention and engagement, but also then potentially comes out and spins out as another business. Because what was the chart? Did you see the chart this week? I can't think of whose chart it was, but showed that the New York Times, or I think it was maybe in Today in Tabs, the Times news app has stayed exactly the same size for its entire history. Meanwhile, the Games app has just gone like this, so that they are effectively like a gaming company. Which is a vast oversimplification, but I also think it's kind of interesting.
I think that's fascinating. And I love to see success stories like that, because I just saw a headline about a college newspaper, a campus newspaper, acquiring 2 local newspapers. And it's like, if this is the state of local news, that's wonderful that these 2 local newspapers will live to see another day, but also a little bit terrifying that campus newspapers are out here acquiring local news. So to hear a success story like the New York Times, and obviously the New York Times is larger than
it's sui generis. But
it's so wonderful to see that these places are thriving in different ways, whether through gaming or
or whatever their ancillary, their ancillary revenue streams are.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So, Casey, I mean, you know this because you've done the show before, but the ostensible purpose of the show is sort of track stories that are going to be in the newsletter, give people a little bit of a preview or your take on them. We've talked about a couple already, but what were other ones that jumped out at you this week that you wanted to comment upon or ask questions about?
Well, I will say the one that haunted me the most, and this has nothing to do with my own expertise, but why is your apartment so dusty? I live, as you can see, for at least one more week right next to the BQE, and I also have a dog and a cat, and now also an additional foster dog, and I feel like I am constantly under a layer of filth. Of dust. And so that one did jump out at me as horrifying. I read every word. It did make me feel like slightly better that I wasn't alone in sort of living in this dust covered. But I think about my mom, who's like, kind of as many moms are, like constantly everything is clean, and how ashamed she would be of me. But I've just like come to terms with this like layer of dust around me. But then to really answer the other story that I think is worth talking about, beyond Dust, is the Gen Z Nirvana headline in the Guardian. And
Right.
so
Okay.
the thing that I think is interesting about this, I mean, it's about Gen Z discovering Nirvana various ways. One of the girls discovered it via a Kurt Cobain photo on Tumblr. But I also think it's interesting, and this article doesn't get into it, but Nirvana is having a whole moment with young people. Obviously, they're discovering their music, but also there's this thing among Gen Alpha where they're wearing Nirvana t-shirts because Nirvana t-shirts are preppy. Preppy has taken on a totally different definition, which I'm sure you've touched on before, but I just
Well,
think,
I'm smiling. I'm smiling because you've written about this, and I think your observation on it is really fascinating. So anyway, please continue.
Well, I mean, it's just, so I have the Preppy handbook from the 80s. I was obsessed with these sort of, before aesthetic was a buzzword, was very interested in these subcultures and the styles associated with them. And so I mean, the official Preppy handbook is such a classic, whether you are into that style or not, because it's such a interesting sort of, I mean, it's from a visual standpoint, it's just an awesome book.
Yeah, for sure.
But that, the definition that we think of when it comes to preppy is, polo, plaid,
Right.
very topsiders, like you're going golfing, like, there's really no, like, you and I could probably generally agree on everything that we felt was preppy.
Yep.
And these Gen Alphas are coming out here saying, like, no, actually, preppy means basically basic bitch. It is Lululemon. It is, and the fact that Nirvana t-shirts are in that same category, I think I love youth. I think that this story is sort of like why I love youth culture and consumer trends in this area, in this space, because it's the rethinking of things. It's like, we can say to them, no, that's not what preppy means. What we think doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And I love that constant, like, reinvention or, rethinking of words or terms or styles, or, it's like young people are just so interesting because in some, they don't have a lot of reference points, but that makes what they're sort of discovering and creating so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the parallel, this is going to be a weird parallel, but there's a parallel that I thought of just a second ago with AI and language models, right? Like the large language model, AKA 48-year-old Ben, has so much reference and can give so much context and has, vast experience to point to. The small language model can be much more focused and much more on point, which is why, if I were to go to the party that my daughter informed me she wants to go to on Friday night in Williamsburg, which has the invite is the Playboy Cardi Die Lit cover with like the promoters' names on top of it. It's very funny, but it's like, I was just joking with her. I was like, yeah, Harper, no, like I'll just put on my teen outfit and I'll just go hang out at the party with you.
Is it like,
and she's like, okay, hello, how do you do, fellow kids? So ridiculous. But my point more so is, it's just like they exactly to your assertion, they take those limitations and turn them into points of focus, or like, beams of light that illuminate, the point of view. The party's on Graham Avenue. I'll send you the address later. You and I was just joking. I said to her, I was just like, I'm going to go to the bar across the street and just sit in the window and just drink a beer and watch.
Just watch.
Yeah. No, but I got to, my wife and I have had a whole series of arguments about the appropriateness of our 14-year-old going to parties at nightclub venues. Now, to be clear, these are parties that are promoted by high school students who have rented the venue and are providing a non-alcoholic, teen social experience for their peers, and in the tradition of the ski crew. Well, I'm not the prep school gangsters, right? That our boy Ezra Koenig is writing about on the new Vampire Weekend record. But to my mind, I'm like, that's really exciting and healthy and should be encouraged. And my wife, who grew up in a village in England, is like, do you know what happens in nightclubs? I'm like, yes, we met in a nightclub. I know what happens in nightclubs. But in any case, it's a whole thing. Sorry, you got me on monologue day, Casey.
Hilarious. No, that's hilarious. And I'm really glad that you brought up Vampire Weekend because I have been
Oh,
very
okay.
interested in the youth adoption of Vampire Weekend, and
Interesting.
which I mean has yet to really take hold. But
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, so
I
I was
think
wondering if you were going to tell me something I didn't know.
no,
Yeah,
but I think so. Vampire Weekend's first album. So I when I was an intern in the city in 2008. Vampire Weekend did a show at Central Park. Remember maybe they still do the summer stage. I
yeah,
mean,
they still
Vampire
do.
Weekend was a huge deal then. I was interning at Teen Vogue, and my boss had gone to Columbia with Ezra, and I thought that I thought he was God, and I thought that she was like, I mean, it was just so much for my like Missouri brain to take. But Vampire Weekend was such a moment for young people, and I think that I mean, at least based on the song that came out last week, I really think it will translate to this next with the younger
Interesting.
generation.
This is Mary Boone. You think Mary Boone is going to
Yeah,
translate?
yeah.
Interesting. That's so funny. I just by weird happenstance, I have been watching in sort of installments whenever I think of it. Uh, uh, Julian Schnabel's film Basquiat, right, which is the story, of course, of Jean-Michel Basquiat, but also includes all of the players in the 80s, the New York art scene, Mary Boone being a featured player, and Parker Posey as her, doing Mary Boone. Yeah, so there's something that the culture is Boone pilled right now. There's something about it.
Yeah. But the album comes out this week, right?
Tomorrow. No, well, tomorrow when people are watching this on Friday. This
Okay,
this
on
Friday,
Friday.
yeah.
So we'll have to do a follow up or make a note. Maybe I'll do something in my newsletter of like, will the young people will it be all over TikTok?
Yeah.
Maybe not because they might be UMG. But
Well, I wonder. I mean, Casey, I wonder. Speaking of your sort of doing after school full time now, and let's call it brand expansion. I mean, do you start to go out and do one of those like woman on the street, like, hey, can I play you this song? In the vein of can I see your apartment or your sneaker collection or whatever it is. Playing Gen Z's the records du jour would be kind of interesting.
the hope is, if not a woman on the street gig, the hope is to talk to more young people in some format. Hopefully not me just accosting them on the street. I'm too shy for
No, but that's the good part. Okay, yeah, maybe you just need a like an aggressive producer. I know a few who'll just like he'll stop people and set them up for you. Well, tell me, but in seriousness, that dumb idea aside, what is the path forward for after school? Because it like you've built such a valuable product, and I mean, at least if you believe the headlines, you are monetizing it in a very effective way. You are universally beloved, as far as I can tell, and so. Yeah, I'm just interested to know what else is on the horizon, or if you can talk about it or if you figured it out yet.
I can talk about it. I haven't figured it out.
Good. Okay.
I will say, I've been burning the candle from both ends in a pretty extreme way for the last year. And so for the last week to be able to just focus on it and not spend, I think a lot about when it comes to writing and this sort of work is it does take time. Like it takes time to absorb these stories. And when you're trying to do that on a short schedule or spending the weekend or, so even in just 1 week in of focusing on this work has been so good for my brain. There are a couple of things I'm sort of thinking about. I do want to talk to more young people, whether that is like in a podcast form or like in some sort of like live video, like something. I also want to report on more stories. And then
in the vein of like the New York Magazine type thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was so cool to talk to 20 tweens. Like I could just talk to tweens all day. And I'm kind of exploring like this, maybe like a Pro Plus offering, whether it's like a trend report or some sort of distillation of, I'm writing the newsletter every day. Then there's, 5,000 links in every weekend, probably like a good like 100 links in every weekend edition.
Sounds
and so
about right.
what are the main things that a brand who is very busy may need to know? So, I'm kicking around a couple of things, but I also, for the first time ever in a year, have time to like get coffee with people or like was able to join you on short notice. So I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad to hear it. And look, to the extent that I can ever help, I've said this to you before, but to the extent that I can ever help in terms of developing that, like I really want to, because I think you're, again, you represent something in the air, in the water, that I think is important and is going to move the whole environment forward in a significant way. So I'm you know, I want to contribute to that, and I think people who are smart and clued in see it as well and want to contribute to it. So take that for what it's
Thank you,
worth.
Ben. That is so kind of you to say.
No, it's my pleasure. You know, like I said, Casey, I'm a fan, and you also have done such a good job of opening your arms to I think the audience that you cover, the audience that you serve, and like making yourself personally and like intellectually available to them, that I think they want to reciprocate. So there's a big lesson there too, I think, for everybody.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate you having me on. Like, I would love, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I want to try to, well, we're going to get you out to Breakfast Club at some point, some Wednesday morning.
That's on my,
I'm going to drag you all the way to the other side of Williamsburg for that.
Yeah.
But
I'll see you next Wednesday.
Okay, perfect. Good. Yeah. We're you know, this is on the record now, Casey.
Yeah, and if anybody watching this or listening to this, I'll see you next Wednesday.
All right, perfect. So there's that, and then I yeah, I don't know. We've got to cut this one a little bit short, so I've got to bounce. But I don't know, Casey. It's just like I really enjoy talking to you, and I more than that enjoy hearing you go on about this stuff, because you are a font of knowledge, but not in a lecture-y way, and I think that's a quality that's really important. So,
well, thank you.
My pleasure. All right, listen, we will talk again soon. I'll see you next Wednesday. And in the meantime, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. And if you don't already subscribe to After School, you are missing a trick, so you ought to do that immediately. Okay. All right, Casey. See you later.
Bye.